Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Geoff Smart of ghSMART. And Geoff, first of all, welcome. Nice to see you.
Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here, Diane.
So I was intrigued when I saw the latest Vault rankings that you were number one in how many categories? 9 or 10?
10. We were pleased to have placed number one in 4 categories this last few years, but we picked up 6 more for a total of 10 number ones.
And this is for management consultancy. And what's interesting is everything from most selective to best work-life balance. So I think that's intriguing. But let's start with what exactly you do. Like, who hires you? 'Cause it's always this enigmatic, like, leadership consultancy, management consultancy.
Yes.
What makes somebody pick up the phone and say, I need Geoff Smart?
What's a consultant? A consultant is someone who helps you solve a problem. And I think the different consulting firms group themselves by type of problem. So your strategy consulting firms typically, and over the years, have helped people who run or own large organizations, for-profit, not-for-profit, help them figure out answers to what questions, like what products and services should we offer, what should we charge for the price of tea in China, what supply chain stuff. You have the technology consulting firms, right, which help implement technology
digital
solutions.
Transformation.
Correct. We don't do any of that. So at ghSMART, we solve who problems. And so that was a bit of a pioneering move on our part back in the day, way back when.
What was your first book?
My first book was called Who, which is about hiring, and that was 15 years ago we published. Still number one on Amazon. I checked yesterday, sort of OCD every day just to make sure we're not falling out of relevance. But it's a top-selling book in the world on hiring, which is considered kind of a hot topic these days.
And so you started the consultancy around the Who, and it's not just the hiring part, it's also the optimization part of Who, right?
That's right. And we're very careful with the wording here. So I'm against the idea of how to motivate your employees, how to get the most out of your people. I hate that framing. I think it's...
Why? Does it productize us too much?
It sounds coercive. It sounds like employees and colleagues are just there as instruments of value creation for these sort of nameless, faceless owners of companies. So I don't like that part. But yes, identifying and developing talented teams is what we do, in addition to helping people who run or own these large organizations figure out who to hire, figure out essentially how to get the right people behind these concepts that are going to drive forward valuable.
So it's large companies, maybe government organizations. So basically you run the gamut of clients.
It's heavily private sector focused, and we do a lot of pro bono work with governments. Some of the most fun work I've personally done in the last few years is helping newly elected governors hire their cabinets. There's this intense sprint. They get elected in November. They've got sort of 6 weeks to make some of the most important hiring decisions of their lives. These hires are agency heads and people who will end up either literally saving lives or not. In the case of public safety or human services, there's a lot at stake, and there are these high stakes hiring decisions. On the private sector side, we have a private equity and sort of financial services bent with about a third of our clients. We sort of came from those roots, and then they're just sort of pick your favorite big industries, life sciences, engineering, consumer packaged goods, et cetera.
So, full disclosure, I've spent a brief stint at McKinsey, and I would think that if you are, coming out of school, for example, there's a natural tendency to think of the big guys, McKinsey, Bain, BCG. What makes somebody want to go to ghSMART?
That's a great question. And that was the haunting question 27 years ago when I was a wee grad student out at Claremont in Los Angeles, where Peter Drucker, that sort of reigning...
Yeah, like godfather of management.
That's right. So he was my professor. He was only... I didn't know then, obviously, but 3 years before he passed. So I caught him right at the end of his amazing life. And I wrote a business plan for ghSMART. And the business plan was, since you mentioned McKinsey, and by the way, McKinsey and Company, ghSMART and Company, there was some emulation in the early days here. But the business plan I wrote for Peter Drucker for a class on ghSMART was essentially to say, hey, look, influential leaders rely on different sets of advisors. You have top law firms, you
Right.
have the strategy firms, you have the accounting firms, all these advisors. But where's the advisor who's helping the leaders make good people decisions? So I wanted to bring a more fact-based approach to making good people decisions. And Peter Drucker asked the same exact question you just asked at the very beginning. He said, I buy the unmet need in the market, right? Helping provide analytics and better decision-making to help leaders lead better. However, I'm not sure how you're going to attract the people to do that level of work. And he sat there and sort of looked at me. And I remembered he had coined the phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Right, right.
So Dan, I sort of humbly said, well, I think it has to do with the culture that we build is the answer to the question how you can attract folks out of these top firms to come work at our little popcorn stand.
So what did you do differently? Let's go back to Geoff Smart.
Wind it back.
27 years or whatever period you want to start in terms of when you're building the firm.
It was a humble beginning. As Professor Drucker mentioned, he said, I don't know any, he was talking about me. He said, you don't know anything. You've raised no money. You have no clients. How in the world are you going to get this thing started? Mm-hmm. So on the intellectual property side, actually, I wrote a PhD dissertation on how venture capitalists make decisions about who to invest in. Mm-hmm. And I correlated that. Since this is Forbes, we can talk financial returns.
We love financials. Go ahead.
So watch this. So I took psychology principles of how to evaluate and get to know someone. And then I looked at the returns on different deals.
ROI.
Correct.
Right.
And Diane, there was nothing would have happened, no ghSMART, if there was sort of no finding. Okay, psychology doesn't matter. How you evaluate and bet on entrepreneurs doesn't matter. However you do it, you make 20% IRR, call it a day. Instead, I found there are these different categories where, weirdly, if investors followed by accident largely some of these best practices out of psychology for how to get to know someone, those folks made 4 times the returns of people who took sloppier kind of gut feel methods of evaluating management teams. So I took that show on the road, started making presentations at private equity conferences, and so demand generated. Now on the culture side, it was right around the time when email and cell phones became accepted business practice around 1995. Mm-hmm. I was 23. I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm 50 today, so it's a million years ago. But I basically told some of the early colleagues, hey, look, you're super talented. You believe in leadership and the power of good leadership for being a force for good in the world. So the kind of work you're going to get to do here is that sort of impact work. You can do the work wherever you want.
So you were remote in 1995?
Correct.
Wow.
We were full remote 95. And that's mostly because we had no money, no offices. I mean, it wasn't like,
So it's hard to build culture remotely. That's one of the things I hear now from a lot of leaders.
I really appreciate that point and question. The weird thing is we've always been remote, and yet, across the 10 vault number ones, best overall satisfaction. I mean, the culture gets mentioned a lot. Also on Glassdoor, which I think is a pretty decent anonymous crowdsourced sort of ratings of company culture at 4.8 out of 5. That scores the top one in the industry. And then, as if those 2 platforms weren't enough, there's this great place to work survey thing where some of the sort of most.
How big is the company now, just to give people perspective?
Sure. So we have 170 people full time in 4 countries: U.S., U.K., Germany, and Canada. And I don't mind talking financials because even though we're private, I kind of don't care. I'm fine sharing. We just cleared $100 million in revenue for the first time this last year. So we did 105 in revenue, 24 in EBITDA, and we've had.
It's one of the reasons you're one of the best paid.
Well, it's funny.
I don't want to make it an ad for ghSMART, but it's intriguing to me the categories in which you're number one. I think that's because a lot of them seem like almost mutually exclusive.
Right. So if you're the most exclusive and highest paying firm, and keep in mind we don't have buildings and all this SG&A. So we give value to clients. There's less cost in the middle, which means more left over to share with our colleagues. They make more money. We can attract kind of the best talent, and it's a virtuous cycle. But it's also number one for work-life balance and fewest hours in the office, which, Diane, if we didn't win fewest hours in the office, given the fact we have no offices, that would have been kind of embarrassing.
Right.
So, but and then we also got overall diversity number one, up from 25 or so last year, which is a whole wonderful other aspect of the culture that sort of representation, inclusiveness, and that sort of thing.
Well, let me go back to what I don't want to say the whole trajectory of your history, but in terms of the go-to-market now and what it is,
Yes.
I'm a leader sitting here. What makes me want to call you, and why are people calling you now? Is it different than, say, why they called you 5-10 years ago? Are you noticing shifts in that?
I appreciate the question. I think the categories are pretty similar. So if you're a leader, let's say you're a newly selected leader to run something large, you have all sorts of performance anxiety, understandably, right? Here you are, Diane Brady, you're in the seat.
What got me here won't get me there kind of thing, right?
Exactly. All sorts of self-doubt, healthy self-doubt, kind of the Andy Grove, only the paranoid survive.
Right.
Kind of like, okay, I really want to be an impactful leader. I want to be successful. And if you ask leaders what matters, they'll tell you the talent matters a lot. And, talent and digital disruption seem to be number 1 and 2 out of 30 or 40 categories of what's on the minds of CEOs. And so, well, who do you call it? You could call search firms, I guess, if you know you want to hire in someone specific, but that's more of a narrow solution. We don't do any search work, by the way, because there's some kind of conflicts there.
Right.
You can call the big 3 strategy firms to sort of talk theory about, culture and that kind of thing. Or you call us and we start by doing an in-depth assessment of you and your whole career, and we talk to people about you. We help you in a fact-based, objective way evaluate your existing team faster than you would on your own. Maybe it takes, how long does it take to get to know someone you're working with? A year? A year and a half, 2 years, but if you run them through our in-depth assessment process, you get much more clarity about people's natural strengths and weaker areas. Maybe you're going to change the strategy of the business, Diane, and you're wondering how to, is this team set up to execute on the new strategy or not? That kind of stuff. So really high-end questions about who to hire, sometimes who to fire, not in a layoff sense. I can't remember ever doing let's do mass layoffs.
That's often why you'll hire a firm that,
and that's not us. But
they told me to. I have to reduce,
Right, that's right. So that's not one of the questions that we don't do workforce management stuff. It's mostly senior team optimization around putting the right people in the right spots, real Jim Collins, get the right people on the bus in the right seats type of work. And that's why you would hire us, to have more confidence in the team so you can execute your strategy and make your shareholders happy.
So what would be the typical problems that you see, especially now because you've been remote since 1995?
Yes.
Most companies have not. They've gone through this 2-3 year period where a lot of people feel rudderless. They don't know their teams that well. What do you find are the common challenges and common fixes?
So I think so we're in a really weird, but I think good time right now in the history of humanity around work. I think work over the decades and centuries has been too coercive, where people don't feel like they have freedom. You have to sort of wedge yourself to fit a job.
Yeah.
You need to physically have your body somewhere where others are watching you do the work. I mean, it's kind of like inhumane, the way work has been set up by necessity for many, many years because of lack of technology, et cetera. Well, we have the technology now for people to have a lot more freedom at work. But a lot of the mid-managers and senior folks are struggling because their instincts are like, oh, how do we train people? How do we have apprenticeship happen? How do we really know if people are doing a good job? So in anticipating you were going to ask me something about the future of work here, I think 3 really important things that everyone knows are best practices for management ordinarily, I think are extra important in a more hybrid or virtual space, or even just a global space. And that's number 1, really disciplined hiring. So picture if you really do the hard work to assemble a team where everyone, you have a talented, diverse, good-hearted team where they're aligned on values, but everyone's really good at their job. Well, that gets you about 80% of the way to managing a geographically diverse, distributed workforce. Number 2 is clear expectations. Lots of companies. I was at a unnamed engineering company a couple weeks ago, and the senior people were saying, we'd like to install goal setting here.
Oh, really? At that point?
From scratch? What do you mean? I said, what do you mean? People don't have goals here? And they're like, yeah. It was almost like a dirty secret. They're saying, from senior levels on down, there just aren't clarity of goals
So this is the KPIs, the famous key performance indicators.
KPIs.
The more specific, the better, because sometimes that can feel reductive too. Like, you will increase by 20%, blah, blah, blah.
The best KPIs are outcome oriented, where it's like, hey, look, here are the targets. And now, you, Diane, use your creativity to figure out how to achieve them. So clarity about what the actual targets are, what drives value in an organization. I think that's step 2 in being able to manage in this new age of geographically distributed work. And the third one, this one's a real doozy, difficult to implement in some companies, but not impossible. It's aligning the rewards to the results. So it takes a lot of the BS politicking. How do I make money here? As an employee, as a colleague. Bad is if I have to, get in your good graces and
learn to golf.
All that. Right. So those are bad ways for resources to be allocated across people. Highly meritocratic, clear links to results, we found makes it a lot easier to manage people who are all over the world, because they know what adds value. And if you're measuring and giving people rewards based on results, then there's a lot less of this politics.
That might be easy if you're a marquee company. You're a marquee company.
Thank you.
A lot of people I talk to talk about, the talent wars and how hard it is to find people. Now, is it that they're not looking broad enough and they only recognize excellence in a form that reminds them of themselves? What are the common issues that, because simply getting people hired seems like a big challenge these days to a lot of leaders.
That's right. I saw on a news show just last night, I was thinking of you. The question was, is talent, with the kind of recessionary environment we're still in and layoffs and all that, is talent still the number one topic on the minds of business leaders? And it was, sort of 57% said yes, and then there were some other smaller things on the minds of business leaders. So it's still a hot topic for companies that struggle with it. I'd say number one, the senior people talk but don't walk the walk. Find out, how do they spend their time? They spend none of their time or very little of their time on talent, whether it's hiring talent or developing talent. You could just sort of look how folks are spending their time. A lot of product oriented, more technology founders and senior executives lean really heavy on the product. They love the product stuff, and the people stuff is this kind of necessary evil. And it's wait a second, if you want to attract the best and brightest, you need to put the time in. So number one, make it a priority, put the time in. Number two is there's a lot of sloppy hiring happening still today all over the world.
Is it because it's like a tsunami of resumes coming in and you've got the machine filtering out, here's your top 3?
So you have the, sort of technology-driven tsunami of resumes issue. You also just have folks who haven't been taught some of the good principles of hiring, so they end up using their gut feel too much. Gut feel is highly biased. Gut feel doesn't get you a good answer about people.
Right. You remind me of me at 33. Yeah.
That's right. We had not a client, because we refused to do business with these folks, but a couple of decades ago, I remember the client was saying, we like to hire hockey players. Because I was saying, okay.
Well, the Canadian in me says, and why not, Geoff?
Of course. The Canadian in you sees, I kind of get it. However, as it turns out, that's a very small pool of mostly men. And so we chose not to work with this client because we're trying to convince them.
Because of the hockey player. It must have been other reasons, right?
It was because of what that signified. They're basically saying hey, we're gut feel hirers. We've got this, sort of, camaraderie thing that we're trying to replicate by hiring, literally hockey players. We tried this. We tried saying, what is it about the hockey players? They're aggressive, team-oriented, make fast decisions. We're saying, great, let's unpack that from hockey player. Now,
to fight on the ice when things go wrong.
It's a bell curve, right? A little bit of aggression, good. Too much, too bad. But at the top, and they're kind of unwilling to say, here, let's unpack this, and then go more broadly, look for pools of talent who fit these criteria. So it's like gut feel hiring. Here's a weird one that's really subtle that I'd love to share. Your listeners might like. People oftentimes struggle with hiring when they ask hypothetical questions during interviews, which back in my PhD psychology days, there's literally 100 years of research that says, don't ask people hypothetical questions during interviews because, Diane, they give you hypothetical answers and it doesn't really allow you to predict how they're likely to perform. So we see that is another cause. People doing these like, how would you solve this problem?
How would you handle it if there's fraud?
That's right.
Oh, I would hate it. Yeah,
exactly. And so that's just like bad hiring methods. So not allocating time to talent. 1, 2, using kind of outdated or hiring methods that don't really work. Those are the main disconnect reasons between talent matters, and yet I struggle with hiring and developing leaders.
Let me ask you about culture, because and the diversity question is intriguing in part because I think there's a lot of rhetoric. Culture is often used as, in some ways, an excuse for people, like they didn't fit in, and it's and I didn't like the culture, a toxic culture. Let's start with the basics of this disconnect between people saying they want diversity and saying it's hard to achieve for some sort of amorphous reasons they can't quite articulate. What did you do differently?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. There's a really fun and controversial assumption in your question that I think is worth putting out on the table, which is, we can kind of riff together on this. What aspects of an existing culture are good to try to perpetuate, and then what aspects of an existing culture aren't really substantive, but are just these kind of old habits of hiring like-minded people, quote unquote, which should be revolutionized. So to me, skill set match important. Let's try to hire for that. And values match, sort of like, hey, we're all trying to make a difference in the world, at this company, or, oh, this company is more just really bottom line focused. Trying to match values to values, I think there's some value there. But there's a lot of other stuff that people say, like, oh, we need them to match our culture, which to me just sounds like clonism and kind of perpetuation.
Mini-me syndrome sort of thing.
That's right. And that's where you end up not benefiting from diversity. That's when you end up not benefiting from bigger talent pools, and folks kind of go, oh, our representation numbers are lousy and our inclusivity is not very good, but, it's not our problem, or it's an insolvable problem, I think.
Well, no, and I think it's timely too. We've got Fair Pay or whatever, Equal Pay Day coming up. I mean, these are just when you look at the numbers of women in senior management, when you look at diversity and what's happening with sort of Black executives and how they fared during the pandemic, it seems like a really intractable problem. But
there are pockets of success out there. I think globally. I mean, we live in a global economy now as much as ever, and being whether it's ethnic diversity, geography, languages, cultures, business practices, gender. That's for sure the future of work, is being able to assemble diverse teams and lead them effectively.
Let me ask you about generations, and I'm not going to go through every pocket of trouble that sort of falls onto my desk, and we have a solution for this, but there is a lot of discussion about Gen Z, millennials. Are we over hyping the differences? What have you found in terms of shifts?
I think we're overhyping the differences because, I mean, I'm straight up Gen X.
I'm Gen X.
50,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
The things that are important to us, I think in our generation, Diane, we just thought were too hard to achieve at work, a real sense of purpose that Gen...
Yeah, we're disaffected, right?
Gen Z, Gen Y.
Okay,
right?
Boomers.
That's right. We kind of go, oh, you can't really get that at work. Whereas the younger folks demand it, right? And it's around meaning. So I don't want to show up and do a job that doesn't matter or that doesn't have sort of a net positive impact on the world, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. Hey, I had a Gen Z intern at my company show me his phone, and he said, perhaps you've heard of one of these. Why is so much of the work still on a
desktop,
a laptop? I'd love to do more of my work here, and that was. Khalil Green was the first Black student body president of Yale. He was
he told you that?
Firm. Yeah, and I'm like, I can't disagree, right? What it is basically, right, we can and should be more aggressive as business leaders to adopt the best technologies to make work truly anywhere, anytime, anyhow, that kind of thing. But the younger generations, right, they're not as attached to the keyboard as we are in
so not that much difference.
I don't think there's much difference, and I think I have not seen, and I think there's a lot of bashing younger workers. Oh, they don't want to come in the office. They don't want to do the work.
Almost 'twas ever thus, right?
Right.
We were bashed at one point. I feel like I'm getting a little weepy here, and maybe it's could be any number of reasons. And it's certainly not because of the generations. Love the like I've got my own Gen Z kids, but let me ask you about the trends again that you're seeing. Chat GPT, and there's a lot of concern about the impact of AI. Are you seeing that with people hiring you?
Sort of. I'm seeing concern, but it hasn't sort of chunked out.
Filtered in?
It hasn't filtered into categories of concern or solutions. What are we going to do about it? It's funny, just even a couple of years ago, tell me if you've found this to be the case. I think the narrative around AI and machine learning was it's going to come for the lower skilled jobs first, right? You can kind of order at McDonald's on a
now it's writing haikus and
now it's writing haikus,
Wharton MBA tests.
It's kind of, and so it's coming for more of the thinking, kind of as my old professor Peter Drucker would have called the knowledge work jobs. So I think I don't have a great answer to the question, but I haven't seen whether it's big companies or peers in the consulting world really having a good point of view on where the puck is going on AI and machine learning. Other than the following, I think having databases to draw predictions about the probability of something happening, given something else happening. What is that Bayes' theorem? If this, then that. I think that's very healthy, very, we want to make good decisions. And if, whether it's like song choices or, you might like this movie, like all that kind of stuff is, I think, pretty positive. I don't know how AI and machine learning will displace poets and, writers and consultants, or what parts of the work it will be displaced, and then therefore what the remaining real high value pieces of work.
I'm optimistic, but I think new technology generally creates more opportunities in the long run. Let me finish by asking about you personally as a leader yourself. I've always been intrigued by the fact you have 9 kids, which I know we always ask. We always ask women about, like, how do you do it?
Sure.
I'm going to how you do it, but what motivates you right now in terms of the challenges that you're dealing with as a leader and the opportunities as to where you grow from here?
Personally?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we, at my firm at ghSMART, we do a pretty good job of practicing what we preach around hiring well. And as a founder, I think I'm weird in that I'm very comfortable delegating to people who are smarter than I am or better than I am at different things. So we have 7 blended kids, and then my wife Lauren and I have 2 twin baby girls who are 2.5, are like amazing. And I've just made a conscious choice. I'd like to allocate real time to family. That means putting it on your calendar, family commitments, and treating them with
scheduling time with dad.
It's not scheduling time with dad as much as just like creating boundaries that aren't flexible. I think everyone knows, of course you should put boundaries, in concept, but I think then it takes an extra level of discipline to put them on your calendar. And then it takes an even higher level of discipline to not mess with them. A fabulous business news organization even was giving me an invitation to keynote an important conference, but I had 2 high school
Rhymes
students
with Morbs, yes,
yeah, right.
Okay.
Yes. But I have 2 high school graduations.
Thanks for considering it. We can tell you.
Thanks. But having, honestly, just saying no. And here's the fun thing that the men and women in our firm, I don't know if we train people to do this, but I think it's a very healthy habit I'll share with you, which is I'm not available for that. And you know what? You don't owe anybody an answer why.
That's true.
You want to go to your daughter's piano recital? Great. Your kid's having some learning issue. You want to go see a specialist on a Thursday at 2:00. It's your damn business if you're available or not available. And it takes people who come to my firm a second to get that. They figure, it's a client, I need to provide a reason, or it's an internal colleague, I need to sort of explain why, this thing is an important family thing. No. You don't have to do that. You're either available or you're not. Give me your avails. We'll pick a time. We'll find a time. And that's a
great tactic. Do you have any other tactics you want to end with? Obviously, it's like, eat less, exercise more. Some of these are basics, just execute on them. But any other tactics that you think many of us don't deploy often enough that might make our work lives better in the immediate term and get us in the direction toward, I think, nirvana?
Sure, nirvana. Okay.
It's aspirationally.
Selecting the right organization to join, I think, is a big one. So I think all too often I've, getting their first job age kids who are talking about the content and the pay and all this. And I'm kind of going like, well, sure. But what's the work culture really like? And how much freedom will you have or not? And that kind of thing. So I think, number one, selecting the organization that that fits your values, it's easier said than done, but it takes real work, and it takes saying no to an otherwise very profitable, lucrative, interesting career choice to instead pick another place that might also have impactful work, but give you more freedom and flexibility. So I'd say that's one. Within that, now, sure, calendaring time and not letting work push in on personal commitments is just a discipline. I have colleagues who really do track their time, not because the firm requires them to, but because they want to see, how am I spending my time? And so that's the kind of David Allen, time management, Franklin Covey stuff. Like, how do you really spend your time? Set goals around it, measure it. It doesn't take that long to figure out.
And you let people do that. You let people say, you know what, I'm going to work 50%. So they will set the compensation that as to what they want based on what they're willing to put in, which
Correct.
I think is
That's
good.
a design we created years ago, mostly to have people who wanted to have work-life balance not feel guilted constantly. Oh, work more, work more, work more. There's this flat salary. You need to work more. Or what's it called? Utilization rates.
Right.
We don't even track that. What we've done is essentially, if you're at a stage of career in life where you're, empty nested or something, you just want to work more because you like it, you want to earn more. Okay, work more, earn more. Great. Or one of my colleagues, Louis, a man, said, hey, at my first kid, I came off, parental leave. I don't want to run and gun for, the next, year or two. I want to prioritize family. So this guy produces super high quality work. He's literally a Rhodes Scholar. He's ex-McKinsey. He's a fabulous human being. Had on the side founded not-for-profits around climate change and all this kind of stuff. Great human being. And he is very highly regarded at our firm. And, he's gone through periods where, he wasn't the highest biller by any means, but if you, as an organization, value quality and collegiality and all this kind of stuff, then you'll attract people who, at different stages of life, want to put different hours in.
So you're not onboarding, offboarding. You're basically just being fungible in the middle as to what people want.
It seems weirdly simple, right? But there's a 4-to-1 difference in income by level at our firm, where whether it's entry level consultants or partners, a 4-to-1 difference, and that's just by aligning the results and kind of revenue and that kind of thing with people's compensation in a non-black box, non-mystery way. It's basically hey, look, yes, you get some bonus dollars on some of the squishy stuff, like are you showing generosity and gratitude and all that good culture stuff, but a lot of folks' compensation is driven by revenue production. So if you are in a stage of life where you want to produce more revenue, you're going to make more money, or if you want to produce less, you'll make less money, but in a way that kind of feels fair to people and makes them want to stay a long time.
Great. And it's true. So culture does eat strategy for lunch.
Here.
Thanks for joining us, Geoff.
Pleasure. Thanks, Diane.